Yeah. So anyway, it's good to be here with you, Chris.
Yeah,
Welcome
good to
back
be
to
with
Ruck the
you.
Way.
Yeah, good to be back in here in studio with you, my friend.
Yeah, man, it's been a crazy few days here in Charlotte. We had I'm calling it Snowmageddon 2026, which you're you've lived in this area. It's always hilarious. Like everyone buys all the milk and bread, which I don't understand, like where that tradition came from. It's like people that are gluten free are like, I need bread.
I need bread. Well, and, in Charlotte, Snowmageddon is any threat of snow. I mean, it could be
Oh,
1 inch, it could be
exactly.
2 feet, but it's all the same.
It's all the same. Fortunately, it kind of turned out to be a nothing burger. We got, I don't know what the count was, but my car yesterday when and like this is after the roads had melted, my car was still covered in at least 2 inches of solid ice. Like when
Oh,
I say covered, I mean I had to chip off like 2 inches of ice off of the windshield, the hood. It was amazing.
I mean, that's bad because no one can actually drive in that. That's a mess.
No, fortunately, I have 4-wheel drive. And there was hardly anybody out when I went out yesterday, but we survived, no power outages. I know there's different parts of the country though that were severely affected. I heard places in Tennessee pretty devastated, like still people without power. And it's like this morning it's 14 degrees outside.
That's crazy. That is cold, much colder than it is here in Scotland. Uh, although
Yeah,
I will say that whatever storm you get in the US tends to hit us like 6 days later or so.
right.
It'll cross the Atlantic and we'll get something. So
You get like a minor version of it, right? Like a hurricane turns into a drizzle, a cold drizzling rain. We were just commenting though, like we just I think we have to acknowledge we're wearing the same clothes.
right.
And
So if you're only listening to the podcast, what you can't see is that Gabe and I, 2 continents apart, showed up in studio today wearing basically the exact same kind of overshirt. So well done.
and yeah, I'm told by my daughter who bought me this thing, this is a shacket. It's
It
a
is a
shirt
shacket.
jacket, a
It
shacket.
is. As so we are wearing like identical shackets this morning. Yeah.
Trying to be cool like Christopher,
Yeah.
it's a lifelong pursuit.
Well, hey man, good to see you. I guess Happy New Year is in order. This is the first time that we've recorded in 2026.
It is. Happy New
Yeah.
Year, 2026. Here we go.
Here's to another year of Rock the Way.
Let's do it. Let's go on many trails together in this year, and I hope some folks that started listening in 2025 will actually come with us in 2026.
That would be exciting. So if
It
you
would.
have not checked out our website at www.rucktheway.com, do so because we do have links there where you can actually see when we're going to go on pilgrimage this year. And there's a way for you to actually make an application. So we'd love to have you come join us.
Yeah, I think we've got some slots for our May trip, right, Chris?
Yes, May is coming up soon. So if you would love to be in Scotland in May and to hike the St. Cuthbert Trail with us, um, check it
Come
out.
on,
Sign up. Come on. We'd love
send
to
us
have
your
you.
application. So today we are the guest for today, and I
The
think
Shacket
we're
brothers.
the Shacket brothers coming to you live. Uh, and we're going to talk about really a conversation that I think like we've been having for the better part of 20 years, which is,
Years.
just leadership, but particularly leadership in Christian ministry
Hmm.
and working and I think this is a topic that's, even though we're going to be talking about it in the context of ministry and the organizations that we've worked for through the years, the work that we've done, um, in things like discipleship and all that. I do think this is everything we're going to talk about is really for leaders, like anybody
Hmm.
who's influencing people, anybody who's kind of bearing that burden of influence and responsibility. it's applicable. And even more
Right.
specifically, I think in the nonprofit context, which I know there's quite a few listeners that work in the nonprofit world or sit on boards of nonprofits. And I think there's just some unique challenges to that sphere of work. So just kind of setting the table that even though our experiences are pretty specific today, I think there is a pretty broad application.
And that's very true, Gabe, and that's good to point out. Just because you and I have specific experience in the Christian ministry world, as you said, a lot of this does apply to people who are involved in nonprofit or in leadership in general. And I know a couple episodes ago you were sharing your heart specifically for the veteran community out of
Mhm.
your own experience being a veteran. We
Yeah,
we had talked about how also both of us have this experience in ministry, in the world of leadership in ministry, and how we have seen and tasted of the challenges that come along with that particular world and the pressures that exist in that world and how they kind of bear down on your soul. I
I
tell
do.
people a ministry is soul shredding. And if you are in ministry or in leadership and you haven't been shredded by it yet, you probably will. It's just sort of the nature of the beast. And maybe we can talk today about why is it the nature of that particular beast
Yeah,
and what do we hope to address, maybe even just a little part of addressing it in doing what we do with Ruck the Way.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, completely. Well, I'd love to start by hearing some of your story, Chris, because you've been in Christian ministry leadership for a long time now. In fact, you're still that's what you're still doing. It's just been a long journey in the same direction. How'd you get into that? Was that sort of the plan for you as a young guy? Was where did you first decide like this is going to be your direction? Tell us a little bit of that story.
Yeah. Thanks, Gabe. I was thinking about this the other day, and I didn't originally intend to go into ministry. My dream as a child was to be a medical doctor. That was sort of my goal. That's what I talked about as a child, is what I talked about going through high school. And honestly, I think there was some good behind that. There was a desire to help people, which kind of flows into kind of the ministry world. There was also the desire, if I'm going to be honest, to make a good living and to be comfortable. Although I know that medicine is not a profession where you get to rest very much. But that was kind of what I was thinking as a child. And then I'll never forget when I was 17 years old, my family and I were living in Springfield, Missouri. My
Mm,
father was actually training to go into ministry, but I hadn't
wow.
really felt a call to do that yet. We were attending a big Assembly of God church in Springfield, Missouri, and every August, they had a missions month. So this is really pretty old school in the church, where you would invite missionaries to come in, and the church would put up the national flags on the stage, and the people that were serving international would come back and talk about what they were doing. Well, we were in I think it was a Sunday evening session because it wasn't in the main sanctuary, and a missionary from Africa was sharing their story. And I honestly cannot remember where they were from. I don't remember what they were said. The only reason I know they were from Africa is because they had a slideshow. I mean, like actual slides. And there were
Yeah.
pictures of elephants and giraffes. That's all I remember about their presentation. So that's why I'm assuming it was
Classic.
Africa. Classic.
Yeah.
But what I felt as that missionary spoke, and again, I've forgotten their words. What I haven't forgotten is this sense of a quickening and a warmth in my chest. It was like a physical warmth. And I remember I was having trouble breathing, but not in a bad way. It was, I was experiencing something. And I will say that that's my first moment of recognizing a call where I felt what I would say is the Spirit of God actually kind of touch me experientially and say to me, you will
Mm.
one day do this. So I
Wow.
walked out of that experience going, something has shifted and changed. That meant for me kind of shifting my self-talk about what I was going to do. And I
Yeah.
shifted to medical missions. And then I met organic chemistry or the threat of organic chemistry in college and ended up dropping the medical part altogether and went into the idea of moving into ministry specifically with wanting to serve as an overseas Christian worker. So that's what I've done for the better part of 20 years.
Wow. But your journey, that's fascinating. That I love the story of a warming of the heart, of a sense of God's. I think because I think we talk about, what does it mean to be called by God? And I think so many people struggle with, this idea of like purpose, like what's my purpose? What am I
Right.
supposed to be doing? And I know not everybody has that, visceral experience like that, but I think it's profound, like, when that happens, and that happened for you
Yeah.
of this sense, and
And I think,
so
Gabe, for me personally, the way that I'm made, I needed that.
that makes
And
sense knowing you.
I recognize that there are other people that are made differently, and their sense
Yeah,
of calling and their understanding of that comes to them in a different way. It might be more of an intellectual way, or it may be less experiential than what I had. But for me, that was an important moment to help kind of set me on that trajectory of my life. And it's good to look back on that too. I mean, I don't often think of that experience, but sometimes when things do get difficult here in the world of ministry, it's good to look back and say, you know what? I know that I know. I don't know much about that experience. I can't remember the words, but I remember what changed internally in me at 17. And I can't deny that.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, and I think to your point, like, there's different avenues that people can take to get to that sense of clarity,
Right.
and for you, that had to be emotional, it had to be physical,
Hmm.
visceral. I mean, you had to it's something you experienced. And like you said, others, it could be intellectual. It could just be like a series of experiences. But the point is like that, you know, we get to a point of clarity. And then it's really the other word I think is passion. It's like the clarity with a passion. And passion, that word's an interesting word because it literally means, that which you're willing to suffer for. Right.
And
And
indeed,
because
that's kind of wrapped up. It's part and parcel of the whole thing.
And that's kind of where we want to take this conversation to is that like there's this beautiful moment of like a warming of the heart, a feeling, a purpose, a clarity around that, but also this sense that this is something I'm passionate enough to suffer for.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so as a young man you had that image, but then you moved into the actual ministry. So tell us about, that journey. So you drop the, organic chemistry is not your jam. And so you drop that piece, but you're still heading towards ministry. What happened next?
So I finished university with uh, a Bible major and a philosophy minor, and knew pretty quickly in my university time that I would be heading to ministry of some sort. Now, it took several years to kind of figure out where the next step would lead me. So I wasn't the
Mm,
kind of kid that had a 10 or 15-year plan of where I knew I was going to go. I didn't even have a particular idea of exactly where I wanted to go. I made the assumption very early on that I probably would be serving in the third world. As you know now, I have not served in the third world. I ended up in Europe. And that's a long story that really it was God leading me step by step. Opportunities that arose, connections that I made during my time in university, where I met people that were actually serving in Europe. I had the chance to actually go in a university men's choral group and sing in churches in Europe. I was probably, 19 at the time. So that was my first exposure, first experiential exposure to kind of the work of God in Europe and the need for the work of God in Europe. So I think, like most Americans, I assumed that Europe was Christian, that the evidence of the history of Christianity in Europe
yeah,
meant that it was actually a living faith. And when I actually
right.
traveled there, I recognized pretty quickly that that was no longer true, that what had been true of Europe for centuries um, was no longer the case in the 20th and
Mm,
21st centuries. So that was kind of where
Wow.
God began honing the call for me specifically to serve in Europe. And,
Yeah.
and again, Gabe, you know me, a lot of that was with experiential. It was seeing the need and feeling that pull and that call, which allowed me to, yeah, as you said, passion, which allowed me to say yes to what ended up being a rather difficult road
Mm.
for many years.
Yeah.
So
I just want to
yeah,
call out
it's a
something.
twisty road,
It is Twisty Road,
very
a twist
dark
and
road.
winding twisty road.
Yes.
So I just want to call out something that you're sharing because I think some of the terminology, that we're used to, some of our listeners may not be totally familiar with. I mean, just the idea of ministry, but as you're sharing, I'm thinking there's some pretty important categories that you're under the surface of what you're calling out, which is this idea that we've talked about of calling that which is really, I think of the word assigned, like that we
Mm,
believe that there's a God who has a plan for us. And our role is really to listen and receive. And so, there is this idea that like you're discovering an assignment that is congruent with your wiring and who you are and who you will be, which you don't know yet,
right,
but
right.
God knows. Um, But then there's like, there's affirmations, and I think that second part of the story that, like, you had this experience where, "Man, I'm sensing assignment in alignment with who I am. That's something I'm deeply passionate about." But then you have this series of experiences of confirmation or affirmation that really is about your passion meeting a deep need in the world. And
Mhm.
I know we've got some college students that listen to the podcast. Honestly, people in middle age who are like thinking through transition
Asking the same
points.
questions, yes.
Yeah, like what am I made for? Is this
Yeah.
it? And I think these are important sort of categories to think through of passion and assignment, of confirmation, and of this idea that where my passion aligns with a deep need in the
Mhm.
world, that you went to Europe and you saw, oh, this thing I'm passionate about, here's a need for it, is an
Yes.
important step, I think, in what we're calling.
And I think sometimes you can when you look at it that way, you can make this assumption that those things are always going to line up perfectly
Right.
and that they will be easily discovered.
Mm.
And I think part of that comes out from it comes from a sense where we think we know ourselves fairly well. And
Mhm.
especially as a young person, I remember at 17, 18, I thought I really knew who I was. And um, some of that was true. I was fairly introspective as a kid,
Yeah.
but there was so much more that I had to learn. And the learning came through pain, it came through missteps, it came through assumptions that turned out not to be true. But it also came through taking a risk
Mm.
and being willing to say yes to something that maybe was outside of my comfort zone. In fact, I think it always
Yeah.
came down to that.
Yeah.
Was saying, would I be
Yeah.
willing to take a risk? And I felt like I always had the choice to say yes or no.
Wow. So, yeah, so it's not it is a series of choices that aren't easy
Yeah.
necessarily, and it's not easy to discover, and there's risk involved. It's not safe necessarily.
Yes. And I think in particular, as you and I both know, in this world of going into service where you're serving and attempting to love other people, part of the risk that we're willing to take is, will I put myself up to be misunderstood,
Mm.
um, maybe hated, who knows, but certainly
Mm.
to experience pain to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and it's kind of like joining the military, I think, in
No,
that,
you're right.
there's a reason why, it's young people who can and do join the military, but I think it's because, like, it's true that as we age, our tolerance for risk tends to decrease.
Hmm.
And when you're young, there is a bravado of youth that's glorious and necessary because, like, if you knew what you knew now, if you knew the pain that you would have to suffer, like, the question is, like, would
Yeah.
you have said yes
Yeah.
to this life?
There's a beautiful ignorance of youth, and I use the word ignorance in all of its proper sense of just not knowing. You
Mhm.
just don't know what it is that you might, what's before you on that road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so you're an ignorant young Chris.
Beautifully ignorant young Chris.
Has passion, sees need. It's not Africa, it ends up being Europe, which I think that's a theme too in story, just to normalize that for people is that, we rarely land where we aim. And
Yes.
that's not failure, that's journey. And that's a theme
Right.
of Ruck the Way. Just to say, like, if that's you, if you're like not landing where you aimed, that's not, yeah, that's not failure, that's journey. So you end up in Europe. Love to hear, and there's so much to share, but yeah, tell us more of the journey, some high points, low points.
Yeah, I would say a high point for me as a young man after college was I went to serve as an overseas Christian worker for 3 years in southwestern Germany at a place called Black Forest Academy. So I was working with mostly the children of other international Christian workers working in Europe. So I was getting through the kids that I was working with a flavor of what ministry looked like across the continent. And those were probably some of the best years of my young adult life. Was just
Mm.
kind of testing out ministry. What does this look like? What does it look like to serve others? What does it look like to and feel like to listen to the cares of teenage boys that I was living
Mhm.
with in the dormitory? Was it like to really learn how to listen to what was going on in their hearts and their lives? Um, so that I think really anchored me into this calling, this sense that, yeah, I think I want to do this. I also had a chance to live overseas for the first time. I had never lived outside of America. And truth be
Wow.
told, I had only had a couple of international experiences before that. So here I was thrown into this living environment where, in some ways, I had the safety of the school that I was living in at Black Forest, but I also had the freedom to go explore beyond those boundaries to say, okay, what does it look like to actually live in Europe? What does it look like to live a European life? So that
Oh,
was a real highlight. After that, I came back to the States. I had felt like God was calling me to do more theological education. So I ended up at Gordon Conwell a couple of years before you,
mhm.
and
Just a couple.
just a couple. Yeah. Gabe loves to remind me how much older I am than him.
Yeah, but the problem with me naming that is I think you look younger than me. And so herein lies the problem.
Let's just assume that we're the same age and we're wearing the same jacket today. So, yeah.
I've just got
But
a
no,
lot more gray. I've just got a lot more gray in my beard.
well, yeah, that's the only genetic lottery I say I ever won from my mom's side of the family is her hair never goes gray. So I'll
Amazing.
take it. I'll take it. Thanks, mom. But no, I to make a really long story short, it was this sort of it was a honing experience. It was testing out. It was testing out 3 years in Germany, and then attending Gordon Conwell, and I was there for 6 years. It was testing out ministry of expanding my mind theologically. That's where I met my wife, who also felt a calling in her own heart to serve in Europe. And then after that experience, after we got married, we moved on to Charlotte, North Carolina, and we served in a church that was Gabe, your home church. And there I had another experience of sort of testing and honing this idea. Is this what I'm truly called to do? And
Mhm,
I think I had a choice at every step of the way. And I think I want
mhm.
people to hear that who may feel a stirring or a calling into ministry is that I think God in his mercy always gives us choices. that there's not one single pathway that if we step off that path, as you were saying earlier, Gabe, that somehow we've made a misstep or a mistake, or that if you feel a calling towards ministry and you find yourself in a place where you're not in ministry, that somehow you failed. Um,
Mhm.
it's just so
I
much
think
trial
that's
and
a
error along the way.
I th I think that's what you just said is such an important point of grace that unfortunately there's a narrative in sort of the Christian, like professional Christian world that if you failure, like the only way to succeed is like staying in full-time Christian ministry. And that like
Right.
if you don't stay in full-time Christian ministry somehow, like that you failed.
Yeah.
You haven't stayed the course. And I think that's such a tragic narrative that just brings so much shame on people when the reality is what you just named of man, there's gates and there's choices and there's not
Yes.
one correct path um, when it comes to your vocation. It's a twisting road.
And I think what you just said, Gabe, is so important. You mentioned the word shame, and we talked
Mhm.
about it a couple episodes ago when you were describing your experience in the military
Yeah.
and what veterans carry when they come back, especially from deployment to their home country, is this sense of shame. And I think people that are involved in ministry, shame is probably one of the biggest things they carry in their rucksack, if you want to use that
Mhm.
metaphor again. Um, And it may
To-
be because, yeah, because I haven't lived up to my dreams for myself or what I assumed God wanted for me. And somehow in doing that, that I'm outside of God's will, that I'm um, under his displeasure rather than his pleasure.
That's heavy. I think like whenever you put this is the problem, right? Whenever you put like it's God's will that I do this thing, and I've named that in such a concrete and demanding and inflexible way. And then, like you said, it's the way I've always thought about it is I think people, and myself included, can tend to think of God as a carnival master with three
Mm.
solo cups and a ping pong ball under one of them. And he's at the table and he's saying, pick the right cup, pick the right cup.
Right.
And like,
And it's never the right cup, is it?
it's not the right cup. And
Yeah.
but the point is like, there's one right answer. And if you don't choose the right one, then you lose.
Yeah.
And that somehow God's at the center of this game that is your life. And it's like, man, that is not the character of God. It's not about the ping pong ball. Your life isn't one right choice, right? It's this journey. It's this dynamic process of following him, which is why we tell stories because stories are the only thing that can contain the complexity of truth and life and what it really looks and feels like to
Yes.
follow God.
Well, and I think when you look at the stories of the people in the Bible who were attempting to follow God, their
Mhm,
stories are rarely clean and linear. In fact, I'm trying to think of one that really is. That they're all
mm,
messy. They're all full of twists and turns. You know, I'm thinking about the character of Jacob in the Old Testament, who is this. I mean, he's the father of the people of Israel. His name is changed to Israel, but his journey and his story is so messed up. It's so twisty. It's full of deception, of deceiving and being deceived, of physical injury, of wandering for years, of family dysfunction. And yet you see that he's a man that's called by God, but his following God is messy
mhm.
and it's twisty to the very end of his life.
No, and so many unexpected things that he could have never imagined. And that's kind of where I want to go with your story, Chris, is so we could we would need like a volume of episodes to go through, all the unique experiences you've had, but you've been serving in full-time work in Europe for most of your adult life with your family. And I think there's some unique challenges to that. But I'm just curious, like, let's just do a little bit of a retrospective, like
Mm.
sitting where you are now, because we've seen the young Chris who, was passionate and probably naive and like jumped into this, but then it's been this twisting road of and you named lots of pain. So I'm just curious though, as a man in the second half, definitively in the second half of life, um, looking back, what have you learned? Like
Mm. Wow, that's a big
what
question.
what what would you speak to that younger man as he was setting out on this journey, if you could?
Yeah. I think I would say to him in all of his bright naivete, as you well named it, don't fear the brokenness.
Uh,
Don't fear the moments where the brokenness begins to bleed through. And I know that that young man would have a very hard time believing that anything good could come out of the broken bits. And in fact, he was pretty advanced even at that point to hide the broken bits. But to say to him, it's one of those things like you hope your children will remember when you say to them, you just remember one day this piece of advice. If you remember nothing else, think back to this. I would love for him to be able to say, okay, the brokenness that's beginning to bleed through the masks that I was so good at crafting was
yeah.
actually an invitation that God was giving to move to something richer and deeper. And also to say to him that there's no way forward really without letting that brokenness come to the surface.
Wow.
I mean that
And
we've talked about this. That's the beauty of the second half of life is to be able to say that.
mhm.
But it's so true.
What do you think embracing that there's something beautiful in brokenness, like, what do you think that does in life and in leadership? Like, when you
Mm.
can embrace, like, what is the practical effects of that?
Yeah. So it makes me think of something that Christian psychologist Adam Young talks about. He talks about the U curve and how we begin sort of life and ministry in that place of, bright naivete, where we're at this part of the U. And then what we want to do is we want to skip the bottom of the U. And the bottom of that U is that place of brokenness. We really want to hit that curve and go straight to a place of understanding and resurrection. So even if you think about like the history of the death of Jesus on that U curve, you have the ministry of Jesus, and then you have moving down the Last Supper, and then you have his crucifixion. And the very bottom of that U curve is Jesus lying dead in the grave. And then we see the resurrection and the ascension of Jesus is the top of that curve. So I think so often in like Christian ministry world, we want to skip from one side of the U to the other without ever sitting in the bottom of that U.
That's
We never want to sit in that place of death. But when you do that, when you do embrace that place of darkness and death, which comes through sometimes at the pummeling of ministry, I think what it I think you have to do that. You have to do that to be able to truly experience the joys of resurrection on the other side.
mhm.
So I think practically what that looks like is that if you keep skipping over that bottom part, that moment of reckoning that we talk about, or where the masks begin to crack and fall off, where you feel like you're sitting in death, if you skip
Mhm.
that, then you don't ever really get to feel what the true joys are on the other side.
Mhm.
You still remain in kind of a shallowness where you're kind of trying to replaster the mask so you
Yeah.
still look good. And I think that's what so many people in ministry are tempted to do, is just to
Mhm.
keep putting on the Band-Aids,
Yeah.
plastering the mask that they feel like they need to wear. And quite frankly, and I think you know this too, Gabe, others are asking us to wear.
Requiring. I would
requiring.
I would say. Yeah.
So I think on the other side, what it gives you is people are able to see your real face underneath that mask. And I know this is something our friend Dale Phillips would say is that if you wear a mask, only the mask can receive love.
Mhm.
You never receive it. So yeah,
What do you
how does
think
that strike you?
is, I mean, profoundly, so much resonance. I'm curious, like, what is it about, and we talk about ministry and we haven't really defined that for people that may not know what that is. How would you define, let's define what ministry is, and then I want to talk about
Yeah,
like how, like, the particular circumstances of ministry and organizations that sort of like tee up this hiding that
yeah,
happens. But like first, like how would you define ministry? Like zoom out for a second for those that may not have a church background. It's kind of a strange word.
sure.
Like it's in the UK, isn't it? Like a ministry of defense. So it's like a department
Right,
in some
right,
ways
right. Yeah,
of the
yeah.
government.
Well, you help me define this too, Gabe. Let's throw some words out there. I think when I think about ministry, I think about um, a desire to live your life in such a way that others are impacted for the good.
Hmm.
So, I mean, that doesn't have to be religious necessarily. Um, but it's a desire to give, to serve, to see others flourish. In the
Yeah.
Christian context, we talk about flourishing in terms of being in right relationship with God, seeing creation restored, seeing peoples flourish, and being in a relationship with their creator.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's like giving your life in service to others in the context of a story that's beyond your own, and so it's like there's a bigger story that I recognize I'm participating in, and I'm choosing to serve others in light of that bigger story of the world. To your point, like that doesn't have to be Christian religious to be that same sort of orientation. Like
Right.
that, we can say like, hey, here's the bigger story I think is the big true story of the world that I believe in. And to your point, like, and it's working for the good of others in light of that bigger story,
Hmm.
which ours is a story of redemption, of like you
Yes.
named, with Christ at the center. And so giving your life in service to that bigger story and to others is
Yeah.
probably somewhere in there
Somewhere in there.
is what
Well,
we
and I
mean.
think
Yeah.
you're not only a servant to others, you are a servant to that bigger story as well.
Mhm.
So
That's a great
the
point.
bigger story is not about you.
Right.
And if it is, then that's a problem.
Yeah.
Then you're not actually serving, you're asking others to serve you. You're actually a servant to this bigger story.
Mhm. No, that's great. Okay. Well, I think that's a workable
A workable
definition.
definition?
Yeah. So, I mean, and I don't like intend this to be like, you know, total critique of, churches or
Right.
nonprofit organizations, but like I think we could just all agree that all people and all institutions are broken
Yes.
and fallible. And
Yeah.
so what you encounter when you're working professionally in the context of professional Christian institution is you encounter particular forms of brokenness. And I think just want to name some of that, like again, in the context of a retrospective. You were talking about mask, which I think is we need to do a whole episode just on mask, this idea that we cover ourselves, that we hide, that we pretend
Yeah.
that we're not actually vulnerable. And there's certainly drivers inside of us that you know, where we do that, where we allow that. But there's also context of where institutional life, I think we would say, requires it. And so I want, looking back, and this isn't about one particular institution. This is looking back on the whole. What themes do you see in terms of the ways in which Christian institutions require hiding from
I do think particularly in the West, and I'll only speak in the American West context because that's sort of my biggest experience and probably yours as well, is that there is this idea that we need to succeed above everything else. The mission has to
Yeah.
succeed.
Okay.
And we tend to conflate the mission of an organization with the mission of God very easily.
Wow.
So, in a
Whoa.
sense, we have to protect God's reputation
Whoa.
with our success. Would you
Mm.
agree with that?
Oh man. I'm like, tell me more. Cause
Yeah.
I think that's a profound statement that we have to protect God's reputation through our success. Whoa. Man, I'm just feeling the weight
Mm.
of that as you're saying those words. Holy cow.
Because what would happen if we fail? What does that say, not only about us, but about God and his mission? So, yeah, I think a lot. And this is the thing is so much of this comes out of good intention. So much of this
Well,
comes out of
the road to hell is paved
it's
with
paved with those.
good intentions, baby.
Yeah. So we need to present this face to the world that says that we have it together. We have the means and the ways and the understanding and the finances to go forward in the world so that the mission of our God is successful. And ironically, I think that so much of that that push, that passion, that desire gets twisted and it does the opposite of what is intended. I think it creates a space where particular leaders feel like if they don't come through, if they fail in some way, that the whole thing crumbles, that the mission of God somehow crumbles.
Mhm.
So, got to wear this mask, got to hold it up and latch it on tight. And it creates this space where I think bad things can grow inside.
Mm.
So, I mean, I
Yeah,
think we're
like
living
a
in an era where we see so many leaders in the Christian world who have moral failings. I mean, not to name names, but a big one recently, Philip Yancey. I think the Christian world has been shocked by this amazing Christian thinker and writer who, for 8 years, was having an affair. I don't think he went into ministry writing his books ever assuming that that would be where he ended up.
Right.
And I can't speak for him. No one can but Philip himself. Um, what were the steps along the way that led to that 8 years of hiding?
It's a tough world. Well, and I think, it's interesting. Like there's so many directions to go, but I think like one is like what where are the expectations on leaders in these sorts of institutions and roles like just inordinately inappropriate
Yeah.
um, or unhelpful, you know?
What, Gabe, what would you say in your own experience has been an unhelpful expectation in that world?
Well, I just think I think that our mission, right, like is to share the the love and the benevolence of God with people in light of all our failure. I mean, that's the gospel, right? That's the good news. The good news is we're incredibly profoundly broken and we fail time and time again. And yet God's grace and love is even more, and that's the good news. And so to share that good news, I think into the actual lives of people requires deep authenticity
Mhm.
because if we're to reveal the graciousness and benevolence of God, then that has to be in the context of brokenness, which is what you that was your first message to your younger self, right? Is like, don't be afraid of the
Yeah.
brokenness. And yet I think our culture and our organizational tendencies is to be afraid of the brokenness. And I just think the sadness in that is that our mission requires authenticity, and yet authenticity isn't allowed because of the way that we've set up, I think, leaders in a way that like we just expect a form of perfection that's not human or
Right.
possible. And to your point, bad things grow in that environment. And so that's the point, isn't to excuse behavior or
Sure.
anything
Exactly.
like that. It's just to say like where do bad things grow? and and like how could we be more healthy, you know?
Hmm.
And I think as men in the second half of life just longing for health, for like I would just want the point of this whole conversation is I would want younger leaders to have it better than we had it.
Yes. Oh,
That's the
that's a
point.
good desire. That's a good desire.
Yeah, that the 25-year-old in college who's having that warming of the heart and entering into, not that they're gonna experience pain and difficulty and there, but that there would be something different, that there'd be a turning. And I think
Yes.
that starts with young leaders who have a different vision than we had, because I don't think we were, yeah, I can only speak for myself, but I think this is true for you. Of like, we thought that's how the game was played.
Hmm.
Like,
No,
that
that was how
you
the
don't
game was played,
yeah, right.
and it often is it's how the game is played. And I think I need to name something that is going to sound fairly harsh, but I think it's true, and I think it's sad that it's true. That in most of the Christian world, whether that's the world of the church or the world of Christian nonprofits or other missions institutions, they are some of the most unsafe places to reveal what's really going on in
Mhm,
your life.
mhm,
And I actually say that with great love for the church, having been involved in many different kinds of churches across several denominations, and also many Christian ministry institutions. Those places did not feel very safe by
mhm.
and large.
Yeah.
And I just scratch my head and go, why is that? And I'm not knocking the church. I think the church is the vehicle that God uses to spread his message of his love. Um, as terribly flawed as it is, my desire is really to see the church become that kind of space where people can be authentic about their brokenness and find true healing.
Mhm, mhm,
Um, but by and large, I found it to be a place where um, it's very, very easy, and as you said before, required that you
mhm.
wear your mask when you enter into it.
Yeah. And you said the danger of that is that you can never receive love. And so how tragic. Now let's just stop and think about what that means, that if leaders of those entrusted with showing other people how to walk the way of the one who was called love cannot themselves
They can't.
receive love in the community, then how does that make any sense? How does
It
that
doesn't make
end
any
well?
sense.
It doesn't end well. It's actually tragic. Makes me profoundly
Sad,
sad.
sad. And
And
this
again,
is the breeding ground for so much of the darkness that we see.
yeah, yeah,
And just like I don't it doesn't have to be that way.
yeah.
I don't think that's the way of Jesus.
No. Yeah, the way of Jesus, as we're saying, maybe as a way of wrapping up here, is it is authenticity. It is not being afraid of the pain, not
Yeah.
being afraid to be authentic, to be yourself, and to trust God in the process.
And I think that's our heart, Gabe, for something like Ruck the Way, as we want to have leaders, have people who are called to ministry experience walking the way, I mean,
Yes.
literally with others, is to find that space where perhaps maybe for the first time they can open up in vulnerability about their brokenness and find brothers and sisters on the trail who are willing to hold their story with curiosity and compassion. And that maybe these kind of experiences can be upstream from um, potential failures downstream, so that people are actually strengthened to do what God is calling them to do, to serve others in the world, but so that they can actually hear the message of the gospel for themselves.
Wow, what a great ending word. I think we should just end with a little commercial again. We started with the commercial for May. Is that because that is our desire? That's why we started this thing, is that we recognize, hey, we're not, our objective isn't fixing the church. It's not fixing institutions. We're reflecting on those things because that's been a part of our journey. But I think like what we're choosing to do is to create smaller spaces where if you're a leader, I think this is, the message for today. If you're a leader in a Christian institution and you're feeling alone, and
Yeah.
things that we've shared today are resonating of like, man, I for sure can't be authentic. I can't share what's really going on. What we want to say is, hey, come with us in May.
Yes.
Take the step, spend the money, come on, because what you're going to experience is a place where you can take the mask off.
And where when you do take the mask off, you will be met with kindness and curiosity and compassion. And that's not just from me and Gabe, that's from Jesus himself.
Absolutely. All right, friends. Well, like we always say, let the walk.
Do the work.
Until next time,
Thank-
friends.
Thanks, everyone.